Assalamu alaikum from Oxford. It's a wonderful occasion to be speaking to my colleagues and some of my former students. First of all, I must congratulate the school for organizing this workshop, and thankful to Professor Hussain Ahmad Khan and to Dr. Lubna Akram for asking me to spend some time with you. Speaking about the archives, I'll just speak for a few minutes. I wish I could be there, but I'm back in Oxford after spending a lovely, joyful academic year at Government College, which allowed me to interact with many of you and also facilitated my interaction with the larger academic community in Lahore, in Bahawalpur, in Islamabad, Karachi, and elsewhere. And I came back with sweet memories which I will cherish until my last day. Perhaps I may come back at some stage, if not for a longer time, maybe for a shorter while and spend time with you. But I know that you are in safe hands, and I see historians and historians in making in the audience. So first of all, there are three myths that I want to talk about when we discuss archives and history writing. The first myth is that you could do or you could undertake serious research, scholarly work, without really giving any importance to archives. That's a fallacy, and I'll come back to it. The second one is that only the historians use archives. Perhaps nobody else uses archives. So it is something to do with historical scholarship, which again is a fallacy. And number three, that archives are only in written form, papers, files, maybe some memoirs. I think all these three stereotypes or misimages of archival repositories are to be challenged. For example, in case of number one, that uh, you can, publish books, you could produce scholarly works without any archival help, without any archival foundation. It's not true. I mean, some of the books, some of the other than textbooks, I mean, the scholarly works that you read, whether they are on the subcontinent, they are on the Middle East, or they are on European history, or our medieval history, or ancient history, they're all based on archives. And each book or each paper has months and years of archival investigation behind them. So even if you read popular histories, which are pretty much in vogue today, whether you see them in written form when you go to the bookstore, or you see the histories being narrated by Delhi historians, historians who give you the series of narratives on television channels. There are hundreds of people behind all this, what you read or what you watch. These are serious archivists and research scholars or research assistants. People like Simon Sharma, people like historian Niall Ferguson, people like Michael Word. They have actually scores of historians, scores of postgraduate students going through archives and writing down the text for these historians whose books you read or whose series you watch on television uh, or on YouTube. And number two, can only historians use archives is also fallacious because 80% of the novels, for example, are historical. And many of these novelists, they do historical research before they start telling you or relating before recording a fiction. For example, a friend of mine, Shauna Singh Baldwin, who has done most of her works on South Asia, she's based in America. She comes from a Punjabi family which originated from a small village in Jhelum and now lives in America. The family had to move in 1947 to India, but then the family went to Canada and the United States. So anyway, she's a good friend of mine, and she did lots of research when she wrote her novel on Noor Inayat Khan, the first woman in British history to be awarded George Cross, and she was killed by the Nazis during the Second World War. And she was the daughter of famous Sufi musician Inayat Khan, and she was the great great granddaughter of Tipu Sultan. So Shana uh, Singh Baldwin, her full name is Shahnaz Singh Baldwin. She spent time in Pakistan, in India, in Germany, in France, and in Britain, going through archives. And I have seen the letters and the diaries of Noor Inayat Khan here in at the PRO, Public Record Office, which is called National Archives in London. And then she interviewed people, the descendants of Inayat Khan living in Paris. So lots of, and this is a novel about Noor Inayat Khan. And similarly, I can give you other examples of novelists. I mean, I worked with some of the most famous novelists in English, and they, over a cup of tea or coffee, they will tell me that they spend days and hours going through the files and stories and looking at the maps and urban history and military history at the British Library or at the British Museum or other archival places in Britain or Europe before they could sit down and write their fiction. So this is again a fallacy that only historians are dependent on archives. Nobody else uses archives. I think that has to be challenged. And then the third fallacy that archives are just in the paper form. They're written letters, diaries, some books, newspapers, and correspondence, or what we call the personal collection. It's not true because writing is a very recent human activity. We started writing things only in recent time. The languages were there, we spoke, we related with one another, but in the regular written form, languages are very recent. And that is why writing is a very recent, human profession. So we talk about Greek historians or ancient Indian writers or Arab historians. It's all, just maybe 3,000 years or 4,000 years of history that we're talking about. So most of our history is oral and most of it is archaeological. That's why we historians, when we talk about ancient history, we depend upon archaeology. And archaeology doesn't provide written papers. Papers have very limited life, so it's scattered. It's in all kind of different forms. Whether you look at ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, or we look at the tablets, hundreds and thousands of them found from different sites across the Indus Valley. So archaeological evidence becomes the archives for historians who deal with ancient history. So these are three myths that I thought we need to address. Um, so when our ancestors started writing history in one form or the other, even long before Herodotus, the books came into being, and books were mostly written on the early form of the paper or whatever was available. And this is how some of the ancient libraries came into being. We hear a lot about Alexandria's library, which was destroyed in a fire much later. But Alexandria was a center of learning, philosophies, natural sciences, astronomy, and that is where the library came into being. So libraries, books, and archives, they're very much interdependent. And now, when we have audio facilities, visual facilities, electronic or digitized version of archives and books, many people are concerned about libraries. But when I go to any library, I feel empowered. I regain my confidence in the longevity of the libraries. And I think libraries are never going to disappear. We may take our tablet, we may take our PC, our laptop, but we sit in the libraries and utilize them. I think even the very ritual or the habit of going to the library, spending a few hours doing your writing, reading, even if it is in digitized form on the screen, underlines the importance and the longevity of the libraries. Even the bookstores are coming back because people earlier thought that everything was going to be online and people are buying online. But whenever I go to the local bookstores here in Oxford, Waterstones or Daunt or Blackwell's, they're full of people. And these bookstores are very clever. They have cafes inside the bookstore. So people sit there, do their work, the students do their assignments, they have their discussions before their seminar presentations, and they read their books. And I sometimes, come across some famous historians that are like Peter Frankopan sitting there having a cup of tea or writing down, their next chapter. So in that sense, I think bookstores and libraries are going to outsurvive this electronic kind of facilitation of archival material. One has to be very careful. I think there are two or three things that one has to be very much concerned about archives. How do we preserve archives? And they begin from the families. Sadly, many of us believe that it's only the governments, the central government, provincial government, or the district governments whose responsibility it is to preserve archives. No, I think it begins with the families. And that is where writing and preserving those writings are very important. Sometimes it really worries me that we are very irreverent. We have been irreverent towards writing and also towards preserving those writings. And this whole system of archival repositories, preserving them, is very recent. Maybe it came with the colonial period. You could say that perhaps the paper has a limited life, so earlier archives disappeared. But I think with the arrival of the colonial state, the new tradition and the new facilities of building up archives came into being. We may have 101 reservations about colonialism, but I think this is one area where we cannot bypass colonial facilitation of archives and the primary sources, whether they were in Arabic, Turkish, Persian, Hindi, or Urdu. So, so the first thing is that we, get into we create awareness amongst our people that writing is very important, the way reading is very important, and then to preserve those writings and family correspondence, family photographs, family diaries. I think they should be preserved, and they should be preserved. And maybe now with this facility, we could digitize them. So first of all, I think there should be awareness and sensitivity in the society at large to respect and to preserve archives, whether they are family archives or they are local archives. I have had lots of students who were doing local history, and they will find these archives at the local level, in the local parish, in the local town hall, in the local library, and with the local families. And I think this is something which I would really like to see in countries like Pakistan. The second thing is comparative analysis. You got the archives, and you have to be very careful about the contents, who recorded these things, who wrote down these things, what kind of language was used. Was it very flowery, floral language? Was it just simple narrative? And then you do the comparison. If you find something similar, how do you determine the authenticity of the archives in hand? And number three, you do criticism. You don't do criticism for the sake of criticism, but you take things with a little bit of skepticism because it reminds me of the famous or infamous story of Hitler's diaries from the 1980s, Very famous historian based here in Oxford, Lord Trevor Roper, was given these diaries. And these diaries were found somewhere in at Heathrow or somewhere. Somebody had brought them from Germany in the 1980s. And this was the big news that finally people had found Hitler's own handwritten diaries, giving us all the new information about Hitler, about fascist Germany, about how the war was started and fought, and the personality and the ideas of Adolf Hitler himself. And they were sent to Oxford, and Lord Roper was the historian. By the way, he was the personal tutor of the late Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and he was at one of the colleges, Christ Church. He studied those diaries and he thought they were authentic. And that is how people started using those diaries about Hitler. But a few years down the line, the experts found out that those diaries were fake. So, and Lord Roper, Hugh Trevor Roper, had to apologize. So historians can make mistakes. So that is where I think we have to be very careful when we are dealing with archives. We not only preserve them, but when we are consulting them, we do this with a critical bent of mind. And I think in Pakistan, what we basically need is we need trained people and historians, especially. And we know that there are colleges all across the country. There are 242 universities. That's what I found out. But now we have hundreds and thousands, hundreds of colleges. And that is where we have historians teaching. You people will be teaching in those colleges, or you might become civil servants, dealing with establishment, dealing with archives, dealing with libraries, their funding, their preservation, their accessibility. So this is where I think your conference and your department of archives within the school are very important. So we need to make study and preservation of archives into a core module, into a course activity, so that when you historians graduate from government college or Punjab University or FC College or IBA or University of Peshawar, you have not only the knowledge of historical scholarship, but also the sources, the archives, their preservation, their comparative analysis, and their utilization. So that when you teach, you create this awareness among your students and the community around you to preserve those archives, because this is where we have been sadly failing. I was greatly encouraged and inspired when I went to Fez in Morocco, one of the most beautiful medieval cities, and I hope that some of you eventually travel and go to these places. Fez is very inspiring, lots of history, a huge, center of Muslim learning and scholarship from early period, connection with Spain, connection with Africa, and one of the oldest universities established in Fez in 854 by a woman, a refugee woman, Fatima al-Fahri. And it is called Karaween University because she came from another town called Karaween. And this is where Ibn Rushd and the famous Jewish scholar Maimonides and later on Ibn Khaldun taught. And they're preserving those archives in Arabic, in Berber language, in early Spanish languages from Iberia, from Africa. I don't know how many scholars are using that, but other than the masjid, the university, and then the libraries, and the government of Morocco sought the help of a trained architect and archivists to build a new building so that these archives could be preserved, and they are being digitized. So I was very much inspired that the country of Ibn Battuta was so much interested in preserving the archives from this university. But then I also know that for the last 1500 years, lots of people have been going on Hajj, men and women. But how many of them really wrote about their travel, which was so difficult until the 1860s, 1870s? when P&O came into being, and British started using the naval service P&O for Hajis from India, from Malaya, from Sri Lanka. Earlier, it was difficult to go on Hajj, even for the Chinese and the Russian Muslims going all the way to it. But very few written archives. And it was only in 1860s that Nawab of Bhopal, Shah Jahan Begum, was asked by the wife of British political agent to write down her diary and her observations while going on Hajj. And that's the first book on Hajj based on travel, first person experiences by a woman. Even Gulbadan Begum's Humayunama doesn't talk about Hajj, despite the fact she ended up spending 6 or 7 years in Hijaz. So that's what I mean, that, we have to create this historical consciousness. And historical consciousness is not just remembering events or so-called famous or infamous people. It is to create awareness for creating and preserving those archives, which will be helpful to our future historians. And this is where I think your department, your school, are undertaking the initiative. And hopefully this effort will succeed. The deliberations of the next few sessions, which are going to happen, I'm sure will give you more technical and pedagogical information about archives. But I am so used to these archives that I feel somehow in as if somehow as if you know not going to a library or archives for a few hours has created some kind of deficiency in my daily routine. So I'm so used to it that I must go to a library almost every day when I'm in Oxford or I go to London or wherever I am. Library is the place where I feel at home. And if I don't go to the library, if I don't look at the old books or archives, I feel as if something was missing from my day. So make it into a habit that you spend some time in the library and try to preserve and celebrate the library. Try to preserve and respect the books and the papers and the audio and visual material that you find in the library. And create awareness amongst your siblings that these libraries are not just there for the time being to do the assignment or essay or thesis. They are there as the sources of knowledge. And I think more libraries, more educated people, more books, more literary festivals, they will collectively build us into a vibrant community. So once again, my thanks for your patience and best wishes. Bye.
Important theme for all the students as well as all scholars of history to know that documents and history have a lot in common with each other, and rather history is contingent on documents, because without documents you cannot write history. That is what the modernist historiography has been telling us all along, ever since Leopold von Ranke, whom we consider the father of the modern history. Because why is it that document is so important? Because document contains fact. And why is it that fact has been very, very important in the formation of history narrative? That is because of the scientific era, which came after Newtonian period, when Newton gave primacy to the physical sciences. And in physical sciences, fact had been very, very important, not only in sciences, but also in humanities as well as social sciences. So, so document is important, and therefore archives is very important because they contain fact. Now we have been saying in the era of postmodernism or post-colonialism that fact is constituted by the will of those who hold power. But before that, 1968 to be very precise, the fact was something which was considered as the emblem of truth. Truth and fact were one and the same thing. So objective truth was the one which constituted document, and document was the principal constituent of historical narrative. Then documents most of the time were kept by archives, and archives were owned by the state. Therefore, state was all responsible and all powerful, and as the biggest repository of knowledge. Therefore, documents which were collected by the state were used in history writing. So history writing had been subservient to the will of those people who held power. So that is the reason documents then later on was interpreted, and there had been various methods and means of interpreting documents. And then post 1945, we see that the archival methods underwent a change. So there had been various ways and means of retrieving archives that were people's archives or the oral methods. So now the scenario has been changed to an optimum level, where archives is being defined differently from the archives during the days of Lord Acton, the monumental figure in the annals of history, who started conjuring up the history, word history, at Cambridge. And he used to say that history should be objective enough. It should be objective enough that any French should not, when he writes, any French historian, when he writes, one should not detect that he is written by a French about Napoleon. And similarly, if any person, figuratively speaking, if he writes about Bismarck and he is German, so one cannot detect that some German is writing that history. So objectivity became the sole criterion of judging whether that document is authentic, and then document which contained factual information that was used in that document, and document was formed the basis of historical narrative. So what does it mean? It means that to my own reckoning, history was dehumanized to a certain level, and it was factualized to a last limit. So history, where historian as a figure of a historian did not count at all. The fact used to count as something fundamental and as a constituent of history and historical narrative. So now thing is that that was a history which represented the point of view of those people who were in the government, or who were higher up in the order of holding power. That's is through Marxist introduction of history, the social history also became relevant. So in social history, one thing that became very important was that people started figuring in the historical narrative. So history then not only considered those people who were politically important as the main characters of historical narrative, but the people, mundane people, common people or common populace, they also became subject of history. In that one text that I will refer to is E.P. Thompson's the making of English working class, and his concept of history from the below is very, very important. Similarly, Antonio Gramsci's work is very, very important, which broke the shackles of not only only monopolizing a hold of the power of the powerful over the narrative of history, but he opened the windows, opened the foray for the common people to step in and become the subject of history. So that's how this art of historiography, it developed, and it became people oriented. Similarly, Howard Zinn's book, The People's History of the United States of America, is very, very important. And similarly, the coming up of annals and French, they gave a different orientation to history. So, despite the fact that annals also relied heavily on documentary sources, on factual archives, and so on and so forth, but then they became a different twist to historical narrative. It was a total history, where history ceased to be an exclusionary discipline. It included the impact, and it rubbed shoulders with other disciplines also, particularly geography. So that became very, very important. And and then with the movements of decolonization and the people's movement, history became different, because the reliance on documentary sources got it was re-employed, or it was changed to a substantial extent, and it was reinterpreted. Like there was a problem, particularly when you come to write history of Africa, which didn't have any written sources at all. So history has to be conceived and written differently when it comes to those societies with no written records at all. So that needed different expertise of a historian to write history of such people having no documented past. So here history and literature came together, and this is very, very important for the student of history to know that prior to the medieval, early modern period, history and literature, they had seamless boundaries. Most of the people who wrote literary pieces, that became history. For instance, even the father of history, Herodotus, he did not call himself to be a historian. And same is the case with the Arabic historians, during pre-Islamic era or even after, like Tabri. Tabri was not a historian. He was exegete, or he was interpreter of Quran and theology. So the history came about as a spin-off of either literature or in certain ways the spin-off of philosophy. So history as a separate discipline was conceived in Prussia by Leopold von Ranke, and he said that documents are very, very important. So with documents you can write a proper, authentic, objective history. Now the question of objectivity as the sole criterion is being questioned, particularly when What is History was written by E.H. Carr, which comprised lectures that he delivered at Cambridge in 1961. The very first lecture is, it emphasizes the role of historian in any historical narratives. You cannot excise the role of a historian or the mentality of a historian from anything that he produces. So the subjective contribution, the subjective interpretation of history became possible afterwards, and with the post-colonial movement, coming to fruition, that became even more common. And with the emergence of subaltern history, subaltern school of historians and social scientists, so they started bringing the marginalized voices, oral sources, to the main stream of Indian historiography. So that's how the local sources, which were not part of the government archives, it were brought in, and that's how history's scope and spectrum got widened. So now, like our colleague Tahir Mahmood used the Patwari record. Similarly, Lias Chatta used police station record. And Tariq Rahman, while doing his book on Pakistani wars, he went to various places and interviewed the women, the widows of those people who got killed in the wars, and the subaltern people, subaltern ranks people, because he thought that subaltern ranks are not represented in the history of armed forces of Pakistan. So the subaltern voice was also given a space within the mainstream historiography. So similarly, I must mention Said Bhutta's work. Though he is not a historian, he is a laureate, but I think a historian can benefit themselves from the work that he carried out. He recorded tales and stories, by going from village to village, and that's how he came up with 3-volume set of the stories, so which have a strange sort of a historical orientation. So that gives not that widens the scope, as I said earlier, because it gives us a touch of a sociology, anthropology. So here the boundaries of history got merged with these disciplines, who had a separate identity, and they were considered separate from history before 5 decades, and so on and so forth. So now, as a historical scholar in history, one has to glean various sources and insights from other sources also. And now, obviously, objectivity is no longer the criterion. Now plurality and multiplicity is the way that people are encouraged to construct their discourses in history. Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum and good morning to all participants. My name is Siti Hawiyah Manan, and I am the head of Reference and Access section in National Archive of Malaysia. Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that this knowledge section will be helpful in understanding more about the National Archive of Malaysia, especially in administering access and reference services to archival material, which is the title of my presentation today. The agenda of my presentation today will start with the source of power, procedures, facilities, followed by the searching system, researcher, research product, and ended with my conclusion. Source of power in access and reference to the archival material is stated in National Archive Act 2003, Section 37, 38, 39, 42, and 43. Section 37 is about the public archive shall be made available to the public after 25 years from the date of action on the record are completed. Section 38 states that the access to the classified record can only be granted by the Director General if the person has obtained special authority in writing in the behalf from the administrative head of the office responsible for those classified records. Section 39 states that the prohibition against reproduction and publication of public archive where no person may reproduce or publish in whole or in part of the content of any public archive except with the prior written consent from the Director General in accordance with term and condition, also upon payment of the fees may prescribe. Section 42. In any legal proceeding, a microfilm recording and a photographic copy of an extract from the custody or under control of the National Archive that have been examined and certified authentic by the Director General shall be admissible as evidence. Meanwhile, for Section 43, the authentication of photographic copies and extract may be signed by a proper officer on behalf of the Director General. Second, reference and access policy. In this policy, state that access and reference to the archival materials, the record must be in open status and in good condition as well. 3. Research room regulation. In order to gain the access of physical record in the research room, researcher must abide to the research room regulation like lowering your voice, no food and drinks, only pencil can be used, neatly dressed and others. Finally, National Archive Fee Regulation 2015. The fee to get the copy of the archival material are based on the format of the records. For example, the fee is Rm 10 ringgit for page. For the digital copies of the file, the fee is not for service that we give to researchers, but the fee is to cover the cost of maintenance of the equipment and the use of paper. A basic procedure to get the access and reference to the archival material at National Archive of Malaysia. One is registration. A person intending to conduct research at the National Archive of Malaysia must be registered as a researcher in our system, and a researcher card will be provided upon registration at research room. Second, abide any restriction and regulation. Also, the researcher must abide with any restriction and regulation stated by the National Archive of Malaysia to ensure the safety and the integrity of archival material. Next is the facility provided in research room. 1. Research room that can accommodate 100 researchers at one time. We also have 60 computer terminals to ease researchers in research and access the archive. To each researcher, we also have personal locker for store researcher personal belongings. We give free Wi-Fi for all researchers, and we also have a duplicating service for physical and digital copies. We also have a retrieval of the government gazette service. We also offer reservation service for a period of 3 working days. We also have consultation service about our holdings and information from holdings. And we also have departmental loan for the department that have sent their file to National Archive and wanted to refer the file again. For the searching system, in the National Archive of Malaysia, we use computerized archival system and services, or known as Compass, is one of the electronic finding aids where the system enables researchers to search and request archival material from the research room. Meanwhile, online finding aids or OFA is used to search for archival material at any time and anywhere. The difference between the two systems is Compass allows researchers to refer the archival material physically, while OFA only can be used for searching and referring purpose only if the archival material had been digitized. For manual searching system, researcher needs to check through finding aids like accession list, file list, catalogs, and bibliographies manually, they need to fill a special form to request the record. The National Archive of Malaysia has 4 million archival material in various types of record categories. The biggest collection of record in the National Archive is the Selangor Secretariat records. There are about 300,000 records in various formats. The oldest record that we have is Dutch baptism record dated in 1642. In 2020, the amount of referred material was 63,985 and the amount of researchers attending the research room was 3,260. After COVID-19 subsided in 2021, the recorded amount of the referred material has increased to 96,329, and meanwhile the amount of researchers attending the research room was decreased to 1,859. It because some of the countries still in the movement control order. For this year, 2023, the referred material was 97,941. Meanwhile, the researcher attending the research room was 6,408. For the research product, the National Archive of Malaysia has 1,030 theses from Master and Doctor of Philosophy of graduates who had used the archival material from the National Archive for their research. Based on our regulation, it is a must for researchers to submit one copy of their thesis and their publication to National Archive. Okay, this is my last slide, my conclusion. Archive the essence of time. This is our department tagline since 2015. This tagline reflects 3 episodes of time, past, present and future. Today we use archive to understand what happened in the past, to guide us in making a decision to create a dynamic generation for the future. Before I end up my presentation, I would like to share with you my email address where you can contact me if you want to know or you have any inquiries about reference services at National Archive of Malaysia, or even though what is you want to know more about archival material that we have in National Archive of Malaysia. Thank you very much.
I'm going to talk about the book, which was published in English, Nation in Turmoil, Nationalism, Ethnicity in Pakistan, which recently has been translated into Urdu, entitled Pakistani Qawmiyat or Riyasati Nazariyati Bohran, published by Pakistan Publishing House. I've been asked by the conveners to talk about the research process, how I went about looking for sources and interpreting data. I don't want to turn this into a discussion in great depth about archival methodology, but invariably I will actually have to touch on these various issues, make reference to archival sources, to methodological issues, to illustrate the research process and how it impacts on interpretation that one arrives at. And so I will say the first thing I would say about methodology is that students often assume methodology and methods are the same thing, but I would emphasize that there is a distinction between methodology and method. Methodology refers to the overall research strategy. The overall research strategy, while methods are specific techniques employed in the research process and to implement a particular strategy. In inductive research, data collection should not be driven by predetermined theories or hypotheses. Hypotheses or generalization should emerge from the data rather than being forced to fit the data. Source selection should be guided by the research question to ensure that the data collected addresses the question that addresses the question effectively. And so for me, when I talk about research question, this emerged from the literature. This is the conventional narratives about Muslim nationalism that were available. One looked at the literature in detail to have a thorough grasp of the debates that existed and to identify gaps in the literature from which you would then try to take the research forward. And so what struck me about the literature was that there was a dichotomy in Pakistan's historical narrative, with one segment focusing on pre-partition and the other on post-partition struggles. There is a discussion about nationalism, the Muslim League, Muslim politics, and then there is a discussion which is about the collapse of the Muslim League, the rise of authoritarianism, political instability in Pakistan. What I wanted to do was to explore the continuities that transcend the 1947 partition, rather than solely focusing on discontinuities. And so what I found paradoxical was that there were politicians who prior to 47 were hailed as the champions of Pakistan because of their role in the Muslim League, but in the 50s were vilified for undermining the same project and being described as self-serving, vile, narrow-minded politicians. And so what I wanted to do was, I felt that we needed to look at the underlying continuity rather than the discontinuity. And to do that, we needed to move the discussion away from national level debates that were happening in both periods, and to look more at provincial level dynamics to better understand discontinuities as well as continuities. And this actually brings me to the point about data, reflecting the importance of finding and cross-referencing sources that provide the insights. So I think what I want to say is a little bit about triangulation. and you need to think about triangulation of various archival sources, including official records, political party records, personal papers, to gain a more nuanced understanding of the past. In truth, truth in the humanities and the social sciences is very elusive, better thought of as evidence versus arguments based on different forms of evidence. And so our understanding of reality, we need to actually accept that it's partial at best and is entirely dependent on the type of data that we bring to bear to support any particular argument. Quite often, we look at biographies, we use newspaper reports, but we must be aware that these are easily contaminated by the politics of the day, by an erasure of the past, the sanitization of the past. And I think that at best, they represent a political view, which we do need to take into account. But I think in comparison, archival sources, particularly official sources, sources of important actors, become more important in this exercise. Having actually given credence to the idea that archival sources are important, one should always remember that they are not without their deficiencies. They may not, and usually will not, include incriminating or embarrassing information. Bureaucrats would loathe to write down evidence which could incriminate them in the future. So there is a very kind of particular gloss to archival sources. They have their gaps. They're partial at best. They reflect very strongly the perspectives of their authors. And I think we can't simply take evidence on a single source on its own. We need to talk about collections of sources. We need to triangulate different kinds of sources written from different perspectives to get a better holistic view of the questions that we want to investigate. And so in my case, we triangulated official government sources with party political papers and records, along with other kinds of information to analyze what they say, how they say it, what they talk or they don't talk about. And don't talk about is also very important, as much as what they do talk about. So as I said, the important thing is about the question. When we talk about the research journey and the sources to access, we must have a starting point. And the starting point is the research question. The pressure is to present, there is pressure in academic research to talk about something original. And that in my case, existing use of provincial sources, because I wanted to take the debate from national discussions to more of a, I wouldn't say micro, but at least a meso level discussion, that we had to access provincial sources, and the provincial sources which already were in the public domain, which were being used by various authors, like fortnightly reports, compel me that we needed to look elsewhere to find something more interesting, novel, that would help us to give us a different perspective on the kinds of questions that we wanted to raise. So when I talked about my research journey, it involved accessing a diverse range of archival material with various successes in different locations. I mean, Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, in the case of Pakistan, New Delhi, in the case of India. I went to Dhaka, Washington, D.C., London, the India Office Library, the Public Records Office, uh, the, the Bodleian Library in Oxford, the Seeley Library in Cambridge. The hunt for sources was guided by convenience, access to material, and rather than in a strict logical approach. So when you write, and you write it in a logical historical chronology, wasn't necessary. That was the order that I went through. Um, so we're looking for sources. We are trying to answer the question that I raised at the beginning. The question is that how do I find some kind of information? I receive rebuffs as well as getting access. I mean, the India Office Library, for example, the India Office records are actually a part of a set of records which was produced by the colonial regime. And they were called Part A and Part B. Part A was sent to London. They entered the India Office Record Library, so you could access there. Part B remained in the provinces. Both Part A and B were also available in the National Archives in New Delhi. And so, I mean, one of my first ports of call was to go to New Delhi and attempt to access the National Archive without much success. But I think that's the nature of the game. I similarly didn't have any success of accessing the provincial secretariat archives, which are in Anakali here in Lahore. That was also unsuccessful when I went. But on the other hand, I was able to access CID records which were available in the National Documentation Center, which at that time was in Lahore, and also access the State Department records at the National Archive in Washington. But I needed to triangulate official and unofficial sources to provide a multiple perspectives, to look at the interplay between power structure and individual experience. And so I managed at the Nehru Memorial Library to look at records from Congress, nationalist Muslim leaders. I accessed the Qadi-Azam papers in the National Archives in Islamabad. I accessed the Muslim League papers, the Rab Nishta papers, the Shamsul Haq collection at the Qadi-Azam Academy in Karachi. And besides that, I went to Dhaka and I managed to get some sources which were in Bengali from Bangladesh, but I also accessed various newspapers, biographies, official publications from multiple countries to give me a broader kind of perspective, to fill in the gaps which I found when I was looking at the different sources. Which brings me back to the regional point when I was talking about data and the question and hypothesis. And that is that, which comes back to the importance of formulating a research question before gathering data and using sources that help to answer the question rather than collecting data and then trying to come up with an hypothesis which you are trying to do. Otherwise, what you simply get is that you have a hypothesis and you are simply pick and choosing the data to support your argument. So this is the kind of background in the data collection exercise, and that was to be more what you call critical about the conventional perspectives about Muslim nationalism and Pakistani politics in the early period. And so what I developed from this kind of triangulation of different sources is to take the conventional narrative of Muslim nationalism, and I'll reiterate it. It was a unified separatist movement. The conventional narrative portrays Muslim nationalism as a singular, unified movement driven by shared desire for a separate Muslim homeland. And so we say that there was a centralized Muslim leadership. This narrative places the Muslim League at the forefront of the movement, emphasizing its role in uniting Muslims and advocating for partition. And that there is a linear progression from the Lahore resolution to partition. The narrative suggests a straightforward path from the Lahore resolution, a 1940 declaration of a separate Muslim state, to the actual partition of India. And so the data I collect actually is critical of this analysis. I emphasize on the inconsistencies, internal tensions that the conventional narrative fails to capture, the inherent tensions, diverse motivations within Muslim nationalism, the multifaceted nature of the movement, that Muslim nationalism encompassed a range of political, social, and cultural perspectives, not just a singular separatist ideology. Need for a more nuanced understanding, emphasizing the need to move beyond a simplistic portrayal of Muslim nationalism and adopt a more nuanced approach that acknowledges complexities. So I argued, well, it was a bit more, it wasn't straightforward as you claim. And so then we will say, okay, you make a counter argument. What was the evidence? And I started and said, well, look at the Lahore Revolution as a reflection of provincial politics. The Lahore Resolution called for two separate states in plural, and the one in the west and one in the east, and the one in the west would contain autonomous independent states, units. And the resolution reflects the intense articulation of identity politics and language politics within Muslim nationalism. Sindh, Northwest Frontier, emphatically did not want to get entangled in a political union with the Punjab. The dominant concern in Punjab at the time in the 1940s was that it should not be partitioned. And when we look at East Bengal, and why we look at East Bengal, because that was where the Muslim League became the mass party. It was the largest unit of the Muslim League. And in the 40s, what was the dominant slogan in East Bengal? Purba Pakistan, advocating a greater Bengal, a united Bengal with a strong socialist narrative on land reform. This was not a movement primarily driven by religious sentiments, whether in the East or in the West, but rather focused on more secular forms of politics and issues pertaining to language and identity. Was the 1946 election a mandate for Pakistan? Difficult to sustain because it wasn't one man, one vote. One man, one vote only came in Pakistan in 1951 with the provincial elections in the Punjab. It was a property-based electorate system that did not really accurately represent the views of the Muslim population. That out of 94 Muslims in 1946, only 6 million had the right to vote, And out of this 6 million, 4 million voted for Muslim League. But I think, the idea that we were heading in this predetermined direct line towards separatism, I think the biggest, wrinkle in that argument is the fact that Jinnah was open to the cabinet mission plan, which proposed a united India with 3 semi-autonomous dominions. It was only after that relations with Congress deteriorated that Jinnah fully embraced the demand for partition. And even then, in 46, fully embraced the word for partition? Not quite there, because when Shahid Sowordi and Surat Bose floated the plan for a united, independent Bengal, Jinnah approved. And this was shot down by Congress, as it had serious implications for other states in the Indian Union also opting for independence. And so what I'm trying to point out is that when you looked at the provincial and the national kind of maneuverings and developments of the Muslim League, it becomes quite clear that there is a considerable challenge to the conventional narrative of Muslim nationalism, emphasizing that we need a more nuanced and historically accurate understanding of a multifaceted problem. But my second part of my
Hi, everyone. My name is Sanjay Mathuria. I'm a PhD candidate at Concordia University in Montreal in the Department of Geography, Planning, and Environment. I'm also trained as an urban planner. Thank you so much for having me speak today. So for my research, I study memorialization in cities that have experienced a traumatic event. So I specifically look at Belfast in relation to the Troubles and partition in Lahore. So I was recently in Lahore actually conducting interviews with architects, urban historians, heritage practitioners, artists, and writers to understand how legacies of partition impact their work. So today I'm going to give a lecture on some of the qualitative methods you can use in the social sciences and humanities. We can discuss some of the pros and cons, and I'll share how I use some of those methods in my own research. So to give an outline, I will discuss first how to develop a methodological framework, and then we'll talk about some of the methods we can use, such as discourse analysis, ethnographic research, and walking methods. All right, so let's start. So how do you choose the right method? You always want to think about your research questions. Always go back to your research questions. How are you going to answer them? What materials or texts will you use to answer them? And it's important to figure out how you're going to delineate your sources clearly and carefully. So remember, you can't include everything. You should have a rationale for which materials and texts you want to include and exclude. And this process is called building your archive. So it's building the archive of your research process. You also want to think about how will you access these sources? So will you have to visit certain libraries or archives? Will you have access to that? Will you need special access to that? So it's important to think about these logistical things and to also perhaps think, do you have a plan B? Is there a backup plan that you need to think about? Then you want to think about, what is the purpose of your method? Do you have a rationale or framework for why you chose this method? And this is a part of building your methodological framework, which I'll discuss more. So remember, you don't have to answer your research questions in all their entirety. So of course, as a researcher, you're meant to be an expert on your topic, but the quality of your response to your research questions really lies in your method, the method that you choose and the approach that you choose. So you're only investigating really one facet of your research problem through a particular lens, which you build through your methodological or conceptual framework. So building your methodological framework. First, we want to think about what is the difference between the methodological framework and your methods. So the methodological framework is actually the principles and assumptions that underlie the choice of techniques for constructing knowledge or collecting data. So it's the techniques that you are using that support your methods and support the way that you're collecting data. So the conceptual rationale for which methods are used and how. And this brings together the underlying philosophical and conceptual basis with your study into a clear framework. So you're thinking about which theoretical frameworks, which scholars, which other academics are you in conversation with? And this helps to delineate and structure your study more efficiently rather than jumping right from your research questions to your methods. So you need to have this framework in between to hold them together. So for me, this was an interesting process in my research project. So as I mentioned, I come from an urban geography background. I study memorialization in cities. So this is I figured out I needed to ensure that I had a methodological framework that helped to bring together these different disciplines that I was engaging with. So often you'll find that you're not going to be siloed into perhaps one discipline. You're going to be crossing boundaries a little bit. So for my framework, I needed to ensure that I was bringing together my background in urban studies, so the study of cities and space, and the study of memory. So this is a subfield called memory studies, and how to bring together those two in my framework. So some questions to consider when you're building your framework. What are the theoretical frameworks that ground your research questions? So what are the theories that got you interested in this topic? What critical lens do you want to apply to your research area? What kind of tangible outcome do you envision for your research process? And when you think about an outcome, this will help you to think about which sort of method you might want to use. And what is the critical intervention or contribution to your fields? So again, this will help you think about which theoretical discipline or disciplines you might want to engage with. So now let's discuss some methods that you can use. And we'll first start with discourse analysis. So as you might know, these are typically, with the discourse analysis, typically dealing with text-based sources, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And this seeks to understand how essentially a story is told within a particular social or political framework. So this helps us to consider how power dynamics and social relations are expressed through the use of language in the text, in the source. And a discourse analysis can be descriptive. So this is how you might assess the text itself, the linguistic characteristics, the form, and it can be explanatory. So this is looking at the text in relation to, in its context of social theories and its social context. And it's often a mix between descriptive and explanatory. So a discourse analysis essentially, it's trying to answer, how is this text produced and created? How is it consumed and interpreted? And what is its form telling us? So an important part of this method is thinking about, as I mentioned before, which materials will you use for your research? And how are they helping you to build your own archive? So for me, studying partition in Lahore, so again, bringing together this historical event and the urban space, it's such a huge topic, and you can look at it from so many different angles. I'm not a trained historian, I'm not a historian, but doing a historical analysis would not actually be, applicable to me, and I don't have that background. But a discourse analysis allows me to think about, okay, which materials or texts in relation to these topics, so partition in Lahore, should I consider when researching my topic, when thinking about how does partition tell how does it tell us the urban story of Lahore? So this is a process of trying to understand which of all the vast materials that are out there about partition and about Lahore, which are most applicable to me, and how will I engage with them? How will they respond to my research question? So the next method we can talk about, it's a very broad method, And it's essentially ethnographic research. And ethnographic research crosses many different disciplines. You hear about it in sociology, anthropology mostly, but it's used in a lot of social science and humanities. And essentially, it's about you as a researcher being in the field doing fieldwork. So it's important to remember, that your research is always situated in place. So ethnographic techniques can help you to reflect on the context in which your research is taking place, whether that's you're looking at a group or community, whether that your research takes place in a village, in a town, in a city, in a region, at the provincial scale. It's always situated in place, or even at an institutional scale. That's considered, that's also a place. So it allows you to create this descriptive documentation of your research environment. In fields like anthropology, it's this exploration of people and their behaviors and norms within a particular social or cultural context. So you might be familiar with how an anthropologist might go into the field and analyze or and investigate different communities. But as with any method, this requires identifying existing gaps in literature. So the methods related to this broad ethnographic research will include, careful, field observations, interviews. They can be one-on-one interviews, they can be group interviews, you can do focus groups. And ethnographic research requires a bit of skill and organization, because you need to follow certain steps to make it efficient for you. So you want to start by first identifying who are the key informants in this community that will be most pertinent to your research and your questions. You want to develop an interview guide for your potential participants with perhaps some potential questions that you might ask them, or some questions that you want them to respond to. You also want to make sure you're doing your research on who you're interviewing, and that you're not just meeting someone without knowing anything about them. So do background information, do background research on the people that you want to meet. And again, around time management, around the logistical questions, figure out how you might get access to them. So it might take a while to figure out how you're going to connect with them and make contact, get their contact information, figure out a time to meet. So all of these things, are a part of the research process. And it takes time to develop a rapport and connections. And your first meeting with somebody might not be an interview. You might just be meeting them. They might just be wanting to get to know you. You're getting to know them. And it might take a few meetings before you actually get an interview with them, before they actually are, contributing in some way to your research. So, think about all those logistical issues like time. This is a fairly time-intensive method. Issues like travel, how you're going to get there, language barriers, those things like that. Another thing that's important to remember with ethnographic research is, how will your research benefit the community? You don't want to have your research be purely extractive in nature, that you are extracting knowledge from this community and there's no sort of reciprocal kind of relationship. So in designing your research, make sure you want to keep in mind how is this going to be beneficial perhaps to the research community, especially if you're trying to engage with marginalized communities. So next, we'll spend the rest of the time talking about walking methods. And this is what I use in my research. So as I mentioned, I do research on Belfast and Lahore, and I primarily use walking method interviews in Belfast, which I can talk about a little bit later. I wasn't able to use this in Lahore so much, but let me just talk about the method generally. So it's a common method used by urban geographers It's sometimes associated with this concept of wandering through the city. So it's a way to develop an embodied knowledge and a local literacy of a place. And it's traditionally associated with this figure of the flaneur. So the flaneur is somebody who leisurely wanders through a city, doesn't really have a care in the world, is able to sort of access all of these spaces, and observe people, observe how people are using space, observe the architecture, the urban form. But this concept has been importantly critiqued for assuming that everybody moves through space equally, which is not true. And the flaneur, the concept of the flaneur, normalizes this man of leisure who's able to walk sort of detached, privileged in the city without worrying about things like safety or how they're perceived in a certain space. So it's important to remember in walking methods these intersections of gender, of race, of ability, and how these all impact how we move through the city, how we move through space in general, and where we might feel safe or unsafe based on our identity. So feminist thinker Rebecca Solnit critiqued this, and she notes that walking encourages a heightened awareness on the part of the walker concerning her status as a body moving through space with all its possibilities and limitations. So she's talking about how, as a female wandering through space, you have to have a heightened awareness of where you are, the context in which you're walking, because there's a safety issue that you have to unfortunately consider when walking through the city. But walking method, it's a useful tool because it allows you to make personal observations. It allows you to develop a street level relationship with the built environment, to get to know the place in which you're conducting research. And it helps us to think about experiential and embodied geographies. So what I mean by that, for example, how do you feel walking through this space? How would your participant feel if you're doing an interview? You get a sense of their relationship to the space based on the stories that they're telling you on location. Now, thinking about how I'm thinking about walking methods through a methodological framework, I first turned to Michel de Certeau and his book, Practice of Everyday Life. So his key concept is, in this book, the distinction between strategies and tactics. Actually, it's not the full book, it's one chapter about this. And strategies, he defines, are representative of institutions of power and the structures that organize place into a set of relations. Whereas tactics are the everyday responses by residents to those top-down strategies. So I found this particular chapter useful for my research, useful for my methodological framework, because de Certeau describes the city as shaped by these governmental and other institutional bodies, such as mapping and zoning. And so there's this idea that they're imposing a view from above, a view from above perspective, where the city is viewed as a unified whole, it's viewed as two-dimensional. But we know that's not true, right? We know our experience of the city, that the city is not flat, it's not two-dimensional, it's not as orderly as government structures want them to be. So de Certeau can contrast this idea of strategies with the walker. And the walker is at the street level, and the walker is actually practicing and producing space in a different way. And you can find ways as a walker to evade the rules, the imposed rules and regulations by the government, by these institutions of power, because that's where he argues everyday life of the city actually takes place. It's through creating our own paths, our own shortcuts, developing these small types of resistance in how you experience the city. And so I found this was a very interesting, very powerful concept I can use for thinking about how I do walking interviews with my participants. And I might be running out of time, but I just wanted to quickly, if you're interested in learning more about walking methods, I highly recommend this Walking Lab podcast by Stephanie Springay and Sarah Truman. But I'll just skip to the next slide for now. And we'll finish with thinking about, what does walking method look like? What can it look like for your research? So I use a go-along walking interview. I used that in Belfast, and that meant that I would ask my interviewee, my participant, to lead the walk. So I would give them the interview guide. I would give them some broad questions to consider for the interview, but I would allow them to just tell me to meet them. I would ask them to let me know where to meet them in the city, and that we would walk from there, depending on where they want to show me, what they want to show me in the city. So it gives your participants some agency to construct the narrative through place. And so it's not overly prescribed, and it allows them for that narrative agency. As you design your study and interview guide, you want to think about also what could be at stake for your participants. Are there any risks or benefits? You will think about all of that in your research ethics process, if you're familiar with that. You want to think about, how is this relationship with your participant going to be reciprocal, so that you're not solely extracting knowledge. So for me, a lot of participants wanted to be, not a lot, but some of them wanted to be named in any publication, just so that, they were a part of some organizations. They wanted a little bit of promotion. They wanted a little bit of people to know what they're doing. So they wanted their name to be somewhere in the publication. Some of them just wanted to keep in contact about what I'm publishing about my research, so that they're keeping up to date on the topic. And as I mentioned before, think about your desired outcome. So are you using interviews for a narrative analysis? Are you using the walking interviews as a counter mapping exercise? Will you use the recordings for some sort of podcast or some multimedia thing? So there's so many ways that we can use technology and research now that I didn't go into, but walking interviews, I recorded them on an audio recorder, but you can think about other ways that you can record and use this method with different technologies. So what is needed? As mentioned, you have to have a clear interview design, an interview guide, clear research questions. So from your research questions for your project, from there you'll be able to develop interview questions for your participants. And you have to prepare that ahead of time, give that to your participants ahead of time so they're a little bit prepared. Most of them will want to take a look at that before meeting. Some of them are more comfortable doing it off of the cuff, and they're more comfortable speaking in that way. For yourself as a researcher, as you're walking and talking to this person, you have to figure out these logistical things. How are you going to be taking notes? Will you have a notebook with you and a pen? How are you going to be carrying all these things? You'll probably be using one hand to hold the audio or video recording tool. Think about some things like the noise that your recorder will capture in the street. Perhaps that might be part of your research, thinking about the ambience of the street noise. How are you going to document through photos? Is that possible? So will you be asking the participant to stop every now and then so you can take photos? What I did, I found that it takes a while to figure out how these things will work out for you, and each interview will be a little bit different, and they'll vary in length as well. I found it useful to, as soon as the interview was over, just find somewhere quiet and write down my first impressions, my personal observations right away while they were fresh in my memory, while the interview was fresh in my memory. So make sure that you're capturing how you're feeling and your first impressions almost right away, just because you will forget. You will be talking to a lot of people. And then, of course, after the interviews, the transcription process is also quite a laborious thing to go through as well. So just to conclude, so I didn't get to use this method while I was in Lahore, but in Belfast, I used the walking go along method, because it ultimately allowed my participants, it gave them that agency, but it also acknowledged that they know the space, they know the city better than I do. They're locals. So it allows them to feel comfortable to guide you through their locality. At least, leaving the questions open-ended and broad also helped me to not be overly prescriptive in the process. So it wasn't a straight question answer kind of thing. It was more of a dialogue, as a discussion, because for me, as part of my process, I was more interested in how my participants, their process of storytelling while walking. So I didn't want my voice to be in there too much. I wanted the process to be more fluid for them, to feel natural, rather than sort of the traditional sit-down interview. So again, you have broad questions that you can prepare for each person, but again, depending on who you're talking to and the research you do on the person, the questions you ask them will be a little bit different. So it does take a little bit of time. You're not always asking the exact same questions to each person. And this will make I think the narrative or the discourse analysis of the interview transcriptions, which I'm doing now, much more fruitful and interesting, because I think you're able to get a more authentic version of the participant when you're analyzing those things. So I think I've done maybe 10 or 15 minutes now, so I'll stop talking now. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk. I hope this lecture was useful about social science qualitative methods that you can use in research. And Professor Tariq has my contact information, so I'm happy to be in touch. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you so much.
So the topic of my research work was British colonization in the district of Yehupura, a study of archival collection. My research covered the area of colonial transformation from 1857 to 1947 in the district of Yehupura. The primary focus of this research was to disclose the concrete factors behind the colonial transformation and its impacts on the district. The research identified in how after the annexation of Punjab until the partition, the colonial administration brought changes in the economic, social, cultural, and political domain of the district of Yehupura. These changes were understood in the sense of establishing a controlled society in the district, and also could not be considered as something other than what were introduced in the name of establishing an administrative mechanism in the district of Yehupura. The phenomena of introducing a new administrative mechanism in India was a project that was not detached from imperialistic ambitions of the British in India, which according to Rolf Fox was linked with the Industrial Revolution. The new administrative system, including the reorganization and demarcation of boundaries, setting up centralized administrative machinery, including a strong revenue system, police, and judicial system was devised to effectively protect the world monopoly of industrial production of the British. It was enforced effectively by the reconstitution of the power structure of the land, which meant search for new allies. My research examined the administrative and revenue changes in Sheikhupura. The colonial state rested on a recurrent theme in which support of local elite was seen of crucial importance for colonial control in this region. And in order to get the data about the local people, it was very important for me to go for the archival resources. So let me elaborate or explain it now that how I collected data for my research. So the archival sources that I collected was the district census report of Sheikhupura and the report of Irrigation and Power Department of Punjab, 1998. I have figured it out how the British canal colonization with the creation of Rachna Doab, Upper and Lower Chenab altered the local economy of this area. Likewise, District Gazetteer report, the significance of Nankana Sahib has also been identified in terms of political value in the period of British Imperial Raj, as the people of Nankana Sahib and Sheikhupura supported Muslim League and scattered the foundation of Unionist Party. Unionist Party served the British interest in the province as power elite. Muslim League provided as an alternative for the landed aristocracy of the district. The role of Muslim Student Federation cannot be ignored in the district. The research investigated that with the process of rural to urban changes in the district during the colonial transformation and how Muslim League attracted the rural people and got succession. I interpreted this research agenda by accumulating archival data from the district census report of Sheikhupura, which was proved as a primary source for my research work. From this census report, the information of administrative setup, the system of local government, police and judiciary in Sheikhupura has been collected. This source, Lahore Gazetteer from 1833 to 1884, written by Naimullah Malik, proved as a primary source material for writing this research work. It provided the knowledge of agricultural and these industrial conditions of Lahore and its tehsil, including Sheikhupura. So let me explain that how the archival data assisted me a lot to more understand about the colonial structure in Sheikhupura, that how they did agitation, political agitation, particularly during the time period of War of Independence and the partition of Bengal, when British had to cancel it due to Hindu pressure, but how the people from Sheikhupura reacted, particularly the power elite, how they reacted. So I collected all these archival resources from Sheikhupura. So let me explain the structure of British rule badly inspired these sources, cities of Punjab. The political role of every city could not be ignored under the colonial Raj. Each district got the inspiration from all the political events which happened under the Raj. It was the event of 1857 which forced Muslims to think differently, as British Raj took every benefit from the landlocked classes of India in order to strengthen the roots of British Raj in India. In Sheikhupura, the war did not prove as disastrous as in the rest of cities of Punjab. The loyalty of Jagirdars in the district was admirable to British authority. British gave the Jagirs to landlords classes as a gift of their loyalty. But the second phase of the war was very pathetic. Thousands of Muslims were arrested by the British from the district of Sheikhupura, Montgomery and Gujranwala, and they were executed in the Shahi Mosque. This event opened the eye of wise Muslim community and compelled them to take final decisions for the future. In 1906, when Muslim held a session of Muslim Educational Conference to make a strong party for Muslims. It proved a new phase in the political history of Muslims of India and proved as a great political event for the Muslims of India, which furnished new hopes in the minds of Muslim community. Prior to the creation of Muslim League, Congress was the only single party who represented the people of British India. But Congress was truly a party of Hindu. It never worked for Muslim interest. Muslims took stand just to represent the Muslim community. The creation of Muslim League proved a blessing for the people of India, and the people from Sheikhupura appreciated a lot that now there would be a political party that will speak on the political rights of the people of subcontinent, particularly Muslims. The seeds of terrorism spread throughout Punjab after the partition. The Viceroy of Hind, Lord Curzon, declared the partition of Punjab. Hindus protested against the partition of Bengal. But here it's very interesting to note that I want to mention that how the Muslims of Lahore, Amritsar, Jalandhar, Gujranwala, Kasur and Sheikhupura attended the processions of Zafar Ali Khan, and under the competent leadership of Muslims, they gathered and they protested against the cancellation of the partition of Bengal. So all these key findings that I got from archival sources, I'm going to mention here. The District Census Report of Sheikhupura 1998, Urban Diagnostic Report of Sheikhupura, Census Report of Sheikhupura 1998, District Gazetteer Sheikhupura 1962, District Census Report of Sheikhupura 1997, District Gazetteer Gujranwala 1883, and then the Census Report of India 1941. So from all this archival material, I made my research more authentic and original and argument based. So, and I traveled to Sheikhupura by myself to collect the archival data, and then I mostly collected archival data from Punjab archives as well. And I would say it was very difficult for me to justify or to claim my findings without the material of all these archival resources. So therefore, at the end, I would like to explain that my key findings was all about that how Marx explained that England had a double mission in India. The one destructive and second regenerating, annihilation of old Asiatic society and the laying of the material foundation of Western society in Asia. The free market system of British devastated the traditional mechanism of India. As Marx emphasized, the basic revolutionary role of British free market would destroy the framework of the old society, and it will give growth to a new society which would alter the norms of old society and put the people in trouble, having far-reaching repercussions. So keeping in view all this material, I would say that British role or colonization in Sheikhupura was destructive on the one side, but at this other side it was constructive, because although they demised the old system, but they introduced the new one. So they brought a strong banking system in Sheikhupura, and which further helped to modernize the people of the district of Sheikhupura. So to cut this story short, I would say that it was very difficult for me without archival source material to claim my new findings, keeping in view the previous literature review. Thank you so very much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is principally held that no document, no history, and an historian has to rely ultimately on sources for his or her history writing. But mere sources are nothing unless interpreted. Interpretation will give any piece of information some dimension, and one is to side with some of the dimensions. Although one can devise one's own dimension, but it involves a lot of pain. Interpreting the public sphere is a challenging task for historians, as it involves many aspects to be reckoned with. For this, newspapers, periodicals, memoirs, and sort of debates even are to be looked into. Pamphlets and brochures of political parties and even circulars of public nature are part of this very idea. The objective of interpretation is to know the collective conscience of the public regarding a specific matter. In order to comprehend it, a reference to a doctoral dissertation is made, which addresses the public sphere of the colonial Punjab regarding the idea of Pakistan, with how to the public sphere interact with this idea. First of all, let us take the case of newspapers. History has much to do with the newspapers and press in modern age. After going through the newspapers, one can build major part of any thesis on history. In the present case, the press was active enough as a sizable population of three communities, the Hindus, the Muslim, and the Sikhs, were asserting their identities against one another in the Punjab. No other province of India shared this feature of the British Indian politics. Editorials of these newspapers represented well the narrative of different communities. For example, Western Times was a spokesman of the Muslim League, and one can delineate the political creed of Jinnah in detail by making a review of the editorials. A complete volume has been written by one of the authors on the very connection. So was important Eastern Time. Ranjit was the voice of the Sikhs who prolifically wrote against demand for Pakistan, and Pratap represented Hindu mindset. What one can interpret from these newspapers and editorial is that press was aligned along religious and communal lines at that time, and communities sought to have their voice in the press by launching their own newspapers. Whether real or manipulated, the press was successful in arousing communal feelings among their fellow men. For example, Sikh press campaign for not opting Pakistan as their homeland was entertained by Sikh community unanimously. Though newspapers were minds of opinions of the said period, magazines and periodicals of different social organizations were true representative of the public sphere. As far as the Muslim of the province are concerned, there were scores of periodicals on different aspects of the social life. Ideological debates were rampant in these periodicals. Muslim civilization occupied a central place in these periodicals. Actually, these aspects of civilization added more to sharpen angularities by strengthening the sense of identities. These periodicals were of different kinds, some related to social reforms, others focused on tib, which is a traditional medication, religion, even women, literature, and even on socialism. For example, in religious journals, Al-Faz was issued by Sulaiman Faruqi, Ahl Hadith, and Muraqqa-e-Qadiyan by Maulana Salaullah Amritasari, Tawheed by Maulana Dawood Ghazmi, Irshad by Maulana Bahaul Haq Qasimi, Khadamul Harmain by Maulana Ismail Ghaznavi. On women rights, we have Noor Jahan, which was issued by Mir Azizur Rahman. Saheli was issued by Khadija Feruzuddin and Noshaba Begum. Hur was issued by Muhammad Hanif Saif. In literature, Kashif was issued by Muhammad Ad-Din Gharib, Ghalib by Mirza Shuja, Sartaj by Dr. Muhammad Jauhar. For socialism, we have Abdullah Falk, who was issuing Gharib, and Ghulam Sadiq Kashmiri was issuing Khalik. Even herbal medicines made their way in the press. Hakim Nawabuddin was issuing a journal Hazik in 1927. Jauhar was being issued by Chiraguddin Jauhar, who was a homeopathic physician in 1914. Ilmuddin discussed issued Al-Mu'alij. Abdul Haq was issuing Jami Sehat. Ahmad Hassan Aziz was issuing a periodical of Al-Aziz in homeopathic, and Maulana Muhammad Sulaiman Faruqi issued Aksir in 1927. These magazines and periodicals show a sense of self-organization of the community, as these were run on private basis and had no budget from public exchequer. More important was the response of readers, without whom these could not meet their expenses, and thus the people had a reading tone or frequency which implied that the public sphere was vibrant and awakening, and had contribution in shaping the dimension of the society regarding communal issues and identity leanings. One aspect of the religious journals was the accounts of religious polemics. The accounts were also published in the form of books. Accounts of these polemics reflect the mindset of Punjabi society regarding the religion. The polemics were held in peaceful environment, and parties dwelled on seeking arguments for their case. They were seldom at loggerheads, and no riots were recorded in this regard. The phenomenon exhibited that the people could coexist with religious singularities and identity consciousness. However, when political process came to the fore with communal agendas, the impact of polemics were already there to define the lines of communities. Another thing we can deduce from the study of these journals, that many modern trends like women rights, socialism were present in Punjabi society in particular, and India in general. India could be a USA, Canada, or Australia, but Indian traditions were deep rooted and could not be rooted by modernism, and this very phenomenon led to the division of India along religious lines. Scores of political figures penned their memoirs, which contributed to the public sphere to a considerable extent. Many British officials also shared their experience with the Indian politics, and governors and even viceroys and Secretary of State for India are included in this sphere. More important things came from the experiences of audiologues who devised agendas to address the communal problems of the province. These ideologues were public figures, and masses followed them with full vigor and passion. They were honest, whatever side they opted in their cause, and forgot their personal ease in order to pursue their mission. Therefore, they contributed in shaping public sphere a lot, and studying and analyzing their memoirs helped a lot in understanding the public sphere. Brochures and pamphlets of political parties had a lot to say about the public sphere. These brochures were designed according to the mood of the masses in order to rally them. These contain even acerbic comments against other parties. Religious polemics were also propagated through brochures and contain somewhat religious calls to the followers. The pamphlets also exhibit the nature and importance of some event. For example, brochure for Lahore resolution of 1940 contained full 3 pages in order to guide the participants. Minute details of meals and stay were also given in the brochure. Even circulars of educational institutions of the Punjab serve as a source of writing thesis. The Hindus were divided among themselves in running institutions. Sanatam Dharma College, at present it has been transferred into MU College, Lahore, and the Anand Anglo Vedic College, presently known as transformed into Islamia College Civil Lines. These two colleges belong to two different Hindu creeds. Islamia College on Railway Road had sympathies with the Muslim League, and its official record is a great source of public sphere, as most of the public figures, mainly of among the Muslims, made their appearance on political scene through the trust of Islamia College, which was named Anjuman-e Himayat-e-Islam Lahore. Jinnah visited Islamia College 11 times to address its students. One of the meetings proceedings are still preserved, and there are many things to deduce from it in order to interpret public sphere of the Punjab at that time regarding the idea of Pakistan. Last but not the least was assembly debates, though these debates cannot be directly included into the public sphere, but many times social issues were discussed in these debates and members argued along communal lines even. The Unionists had been reconciliatory in stance and in tone, but the Congress members were always there to raise objections. One of the debates on communalism was conducted in July 1937, in which the name Pakistan was appeared, and movement for Pakistan was not even in pipeline, and party assembly of the Muslim League was just non-existent in the Punjab at that time. Actually, it was the coinage of Chaudhry Rahmat Ali which gained credence in the public sphere to such extent that assembly members considered it a trajectory to the division of India along communal lines. So these were some important aspects of the utilizing the sources of public sphere, particularly in Punjab, regarding the idea of Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Muhammad Khalid Nawaz, working as Project Administrator in National Archives of Pakistan. I was given the honor to represent Government of Pakistan in OIC Symposium held in Riyadh on 9 June 2022. This symposium was related to National Archives in Islamic States, distinctive experiences and future direction. I have also attended the MTCP training program 2023 in Malaysia. This program training was related to disaster preparedness for records and archives management. I was also given the honor to represent Government of Pakistan in the conference on 2nd November 2023 on World Digital Preservation Day. Today, I have been given the opportunity to deliver a brief presentation to all the distinguished participants on the topic related to threats and issues while preserving digital content. First of all, let's discuss what is digital content. As we all know that knowledge grew rapidly in the late 20th century, the expansion of knowledge has led to the publication and distribution of information across all fields. This is the era of global digital revolution. The advent of computer, which have been modernized in recent days, has led to discovery, retrieval, and creation of new information across all fields. In 1980s, there was introduction of electronic text, hypertext, and email, which has led to the digitization and linking. And we all know that on 24th December 1990, it was the day when internet was revolutionized as Barnsley developed the HTTP language and developed URI, due to which internet became more advanced and more popular, and it was spread across all the world. And as a result, there were a lot of digital products which are called digital content. These are all related to music, data, images, documents, which are stored in digital or analog storage places. Digital contents can be of two types. Either it can be born digital or be digital. Be digital content refers to information converted from analog to digital through reproduction methods like scanning. And the born digital refers to the content which was originally developed digitally using the technology. The key motivations of digital transformation in modern era are basically digital content provides operational flexibility and creativity. It also provides empowered information and a new kind of digital experiences. First of all, we just have to differentiate between preservation from conservation, as these two terms are basically different from each other. Preservation is a long-term safeguarding methods, and conservation is the process during which we conserve, restore, or treat the information, document, or record which have been deteriorated, which is in brittle condition. So after we understand the difference between preservation and conservation, now we are discussing the preservation of digital content. So this term of preservation and conservation must be understood first. So digital preservation entails encountering various significant problems and challenges. As we all know, this is the era of digitalization, and we are facing the issue, a lot of issues with regard to this digitalization environment. As digitization depends on the nature of the content being preserved, maintenance of trust in the data, and the huge amount of data which is being dealt, and the technology is being advanced on a daily basis, and old technology is obsolete. We have to address the media which deals the digital content, as we also face the scarcity of experts, and there are copyright issues too after the advent of digital content. After the Industrial Revolution, there have been a lot of digital innovations which are urging the governments and organizations to undergo digital transformation. So there are many available digital transformation platforms and in various organizations like ERP, which are available in all business entities in Pakistan. All the private organizations are running on ERPs like SAP, Oracle, and different, etc. And there are knowledge management system, KMS, which are also operational in various universities, in educational institutions. There are ERMS, electronic record management systems, ERDMS, and ECMS. ECMS is able to deal with the content of records of different types, which can be either structured or unstructured and semi-structured data. For example, Microsoft SharePoint. Why do we need preservation? Preservation is essential because we want to retain the original format of information. As original format of information is essential, which is most reliable, we also want to maintain the genuineness of the digital data. If the data is genuine, then it is authentic. We also recover or upgrade or restore the physical media by providing required environmental measures like temperature, humidity, and these kind of controls make the possibility to retrieve or to restore the data. We also try our best to reverse the damages incurred, like we use restoration techniques on the media which is in brittle form or which has been deteriorated. And we provide a lot of attention to minimize the risk of data loss. We also implement security measures to safeguard the digital data. What are the goals of the digital preservation? The primary goal of digital preservation is the long-term accessibility, usability, and authenticity. As in all archives, libraries, and data centers, the primary focus is to maintain the authenticity of the objects, information, or data. This means that the output of the preservation process should be identical in all significant aspects from the original objects that were subjected to the preservation process. What is the principle of digital preservation? The principle of digital preservation is the longevity, as the information which is being preserved must be available for the longer period as possible for the human, as per human possibility. And the selection also plays a vital role, as we are going to preserve the digital data, and data which has to be selected for the preservation must be of vital importance and historical significance and the significance for the end user. The preservation quality must be of efficient quality. It must be of that quality which can be reliable, which can be trustworthy, which can provide the integrity, which can assure the integrity of the data, basically. So integrity is of prime importance, as if the data is not authentic, is not accurate, then what is the meaning of preserving such data? And after preserving the digital data, access is of prime importance, whereas the data which has been preserved must be accessible to the users. Let's discuss the preservation types. We usually use different types of preservation. Usually we use preventive methods. If the data is deteriorated, is in brittle form, then we use preventive method to recover it and to conserve it to be made available in a well-mannered, in a well shape. Another type of preservation is the restorative. This deals with physical records, basically. If the record is in brittle form, then we restore it in conservation and paper restoration, in restoration processes of different like paper or microfilms or other medias. So we restore the brittle data into better form so that this can be made available for the researchers or the users. Content. This is mostly related to digital record, as we prepare descriptions, catalogs, and metadata for the digital record to be saved in the storage media. So content is of prime importance. If the content of the digital media, digital content is risky, then what is the usage of that digital material? Now we move on to the threats and issues which are related to the digital material, content, or record. There are a lot of threats as the world is rapidly moving to digitalization, and all the information is being shared in a digital form. And the digitalization is also the need of the hour, as without digitalization, what information can be made available to the public? So a digital file is made up of bits, which are a string of zeros and ones. Trying to keep these bits safe is at risk of many things. Files can become corrupted, storage media can break down, computers and softwares may stop working, the bits may be ignored or left behind or deleted. Third-party cloud storage provider could go out of business. So these are the threats related to keeping the data. And these threats need to be mitigated to keep the data. Further issues or threats are related to the accessibility of data. Digital files could be moved from one format to another. To access the data, we need the media of the data, and we need to move from one format to other. All the older software can become obsolete. New software can be used to display the data. So all this planning has to be well thought. So to reconstruct the data that is stored in a stream of bits, usually need computer software that can display change, analyze, or interact with that data's encoding or format in some other way. The encodings may change over time. Less popular file formats may become useless over time because the software that can open them is no longer supported. So these are the issues which are related to the accessibility of data. And if we want to preserve the data, then accessibility is the main focus. And to make the data accessible, we have to mitigate these threats. We have to resolve these issues first. Another issue which we face with the digital content, digital data, is the authenticity of data. The authenticity and integrity of digital resources may be just as important. For instance, researchers will need to be sure that the reference they use will remain valid over time. Courts will need legal evidence. Government may enforce the law when it comes to authenticity. So how can one be sure that a digital object hasn't changed? Digital materials can change over time because they can be easily edited or changed, damaged by media failure. For a person to trust the outcome of digital preservation work, the whole life cycle of the digital materials and all the people or things that have interacted with them must be carefully thought through. Another issue which we have to encounter while managing and preserving the digital content is the data storage capacity. Simple preservation methods that work well on one level might not be easy to expand or to handle very large amount of data. The amount of data is growing 60% per year, and the amount of storage is growing by 25%. So there's a huge gap. And the need of the budget is also growing rapidly. So this creates the data storage capacity issues as the data is growing and the growth of data is much more higher than the growth of data storage capacity. And the need of budget to handle this gap is also very huge. So some repositories still have hard time while to grow their space, to grow their repository size, to meet the growth of the data. It is important not to underestimate the technical and managerial difficulties of getting access to, managing, and giving people use of digital material on this scale. It's also important to remember that choosing what to keep, evaluating it, and getting rid of it are all important parts of digital management. So digital content involves technology, and technology becomes advanced day by day, and the old technology becomes obsolete. So old hardwares and all the equipments become obsolete. So this is the major risk which is related to technology. There is also a huge number of computer viruses. There are also the hackers which hack the data, which reduces the which provides the authenticity issue, which raises the questions related to the authenticity and integrity. Information may disappear. Um, Boundaries of work are not defined. Maintaining a relationship between digital content and digital metadata. Whenever digital content is created, then we have to enter the description information, which is called metadata for that digital content. And this can be different in some cases, or the hackers may edit that information. There are also the issues related to intellectual property, the muddy water of rights management. So there are also the strategic issues related to the digital content, preserving the digital content, which are at the strategic level, decision-making level. We have to identify what needs to be preserved, as there is a huge amount of data, billions of bits of information which needs to be preserved, which needs to be stored. So we have to make the right choices. There are custodial problems, and what information will be kept by whom, and who will be responsible for that information. There is also the need of economic support, and as the technology is changing day by day, and to maintain that standard, we required a huge amount of funding. Furthermore, there is a lack of awareness among the public, as they are not aware of the preservation of the data, and a lot of information goes on wasted. There is a lack of standards. There is a lack of research agenda. Due to these issues, the digital content, mostly the digital content, is not preserved and is wasted. There are also the archival issues. I also work in archives, and being the archivist, we face the challenges related to what we have to keep. we have to we have to carry on the appraisal of all the information, and we only keep the valuable information which is of historical significance, which is of vital importance to the nation, which is of uh, valuable information for the users, researchers. So we can only keep that information. And as we face a capacity issue, we cannot preserve all the information, due to which a lot of content, a lot of record is deleted or destroyed. And all there is the question of authenticity and reliability of digital content as well. Thank you so very much. This is all from my side. We can also go for practical examples related to the digital content, as we can discuss the traditional chest X-ray, basically, which was produced in 3 pieces of film, and these 3 fixed images, but a computerized axial tomography, which is called CAT, CAT, scan of the chest, can produce scores of different images, as there are a lot of images, making it a more flexible and incisive tool for the diagnosis. As previously, the old technology, there were 3 films of X-ray which were used for the diagnosis, and now with the advent of computerized technology of CAT scan, there are a lot of images which can help in diagnosis. So how should CAT scans be preserved? This raises the question in the minds of the while considering the digital content preservation. It depends on our occupation or model of what a CAT scan is. If we wanted to preserve the richest source of data about the state of a particular person's body at a given time, we would have to preserve the CAT scan as an instance of a specific type of technology. So the digital content raises a lot of questions and raises a lot of issues and threats which we have to encounter. And to encounter these issues, ISOs were also developed, as there is a OAIS, ISO 14721, which deals with the preservation of the digital content. But this also has its limitation, because it is too generalized for implementation. Further refinement and extension are necessary for specific domains. So a refinement for record is needed. So there is a lot to do while facing these issues, and we have to encounter these issues. This is all on my part. I hope I have conveyed the most of the issues and threats which are being faced in the digital content preservation. And I hope this will serve the purpose. Thank you also very much. Allah Hafiz.
Assalamualaikum and good morning to all participants. My name is Siti Hawiyah Manan, and I am the Head of Reference and Access Section in National Archive of Malaysia. Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that this knowledge section will be helpful in understanding more about the National Archive of Malaysia, especially in administering access and reference services to archival material, which is the title of my presentation today. The agenda of my presentation today will start with the source of power, procedures, facilities, followed by the searching system, research product, and ended with my conclusion. source of power in access and reference to the archival material is stated in National Archive Act 2003, Section 37, 38, 39, 42 and 43. Section 37 is about the public archive shall be made available to the public after 25 years from the date of action on the record are completed. Section 38 states that the access to the classified record can only be granted by the Director General if the person has obtained special authority in writing in the behalf from the administrative head of the office responsible for those classified records. Section 39 states that the prohibition against reproduction and publication of public archive where no person may reproduce or publish in whole or in part of the content of any public archive except with the prior written consent from the Director General in accordance with term and condition, also upon payment of the fees may prescribe. Section 42. In any legal proceeding, a microfilm recording and a photographic copy of an extract from the custody or under control of the National Archive that have been examined and certified authentic by the Director General shall be admissible as evidence. Meanwhile, for Section 43, the authentication of photographic copies and abstract may be signed by a proper officer on behalf of the Director General. Second, reference and access policy. In this policy, state that access and reference to the archival materials, the record must be in open status and in good condition as well. 3. Research room regulation. In order to gain the access of physical record in the research room, researcher must abide to the research room regulation like lowering your voice, no food and drinks, only pencil can be used, neatly dressed and others. Finally, National Archive Fee Regulation 2015. The fee to get the copy of the archival material are based on the format of the records. For example, the fee is Rm 10 ringgit for page. For the digital copies of the file, the fee is not for service that we give to researchers, but the fee is to cover the cost of maintenance of the equipment and the use of paper. A basic procedure to get the access and reference to the archival material at National Archive of Malaysia. One is registration. A person intending to conduct research at the National Archive of Malaysia must be registered as a researcher in our system, and a researcher card will be provided upon registration at research room. Second, abide any restriction and regulation. Also, the researcher must abide with any restriction and regulation stated by the National Archive of Malaysia to ensure the safety and the integrity of archival material. Next is the facility provided in research room. 1. Research room that can accommodate 100 researchers at one time. We also have 60 computer terminals to ease researcher in research and access the archive. To each researcher, we also have personal locker for store researcher personal belongings. We give free Wi-Fi for all researchers, and we also have a duplicating service for physical and digital copies. We also have a retrieval of the government gazette service. We also offer reservation service for a period of 3 working days. We also have consultation service about our holdings and information from holdings. And we also have departmental loan for the department that have sent their file to National Archive and wanted to refer the file again. For the searching system, in the National Archive of Malaysia, we use computerized archival system and services, or known as Compass, is one of the electronic finding aids where the system enables researchers to search and request archival material from the research room. Meanwhile, online finding aids or OFA is used to search for archival material at any time and anywhere. The difference between the two systems is Compass allows researchers to refer the archival material physically, while OFA only can be used for searching and referring purpose only if the archival material had been digitized. For manual searching system, researchers need to check through finding aids like accession lists, file lists, catalogs, and bibliographies manually. They need to fill a special form to request the records. The National Archive of Malaysia has 4 million archival material in various types of record categories. The biggest collection of record in the National Archive is the Selangor Secretariat records. There are about 300,000 records in various formats. The oldest record that we have is Dutch baptism record dated in 1642. In 2020, the amount of referred material was 63,985 and the amount of researchers attending the research room was 3,260. After COVID-19 subsided in 2021, the recorded amount of the referred material has increased to 96,329, and meanwhile the amount of researchers attending the research room was decreased to 1,859. It because some of the countries still in the movement control order. For this year, 2023, the referred material was 97,941. Meanwhile, the researcher attending the research room was 6,408. For the research product, the National Archive of Malaysia has 1,030 theses from master and doctor philosophy of graduates who had used the archival material from the National Archive for their research. Based on our regulation, it is a must for researchers to submit one copy of their thesis and their publication to National Archive. Okay, this is my last slide, my conclusion. Archive the essence of time. This is our department tagline since 2015. This tagline reflects 3 episodes of time, past, present, and future. Today we use archive to understand what happened in the past, to guide us in making a decision to create a dynamic generation for the future. Before I end up my presentation, I would like to share with you my email address where you can contact me if you want to know or you have any inquiries about reference services at National Archive of Malaysia, or even though what is you want to know more about archival material that we have in National Archive of Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Dua from the NC Archives, and my presentation will focus on some of the excavations, interpretations, and reconnections we have made at the archive in the past 3 years, often using widely available digital tools for this purpose. It will also include an introduction and overview of the NC archive and a discussion on challenges and possible opportunities, and perhaps a call for action related to post-colonial archiving and archival research. As we're also an institutional repository, our collections are intertwined with the history of the Mayo School of Arts and colonial art education, as well as the history of the National College of Arts and its pioneering role in the development of art and design in Pakistan. Though formally founded in 1875 under Principal John Lockwood Kipling, plans for the development of an industrial art school for the Punjab had been in circulation since at least the early 1860s. The MSA was restructured, modernized, and renamed the National College of Arts in 1958 under Mark Ritter Sponenberg. The NC Archive, meanwhile, were founded at the turn of the millennium to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the founding of the Mayo School of Arts. Our initial collections were processed with the help of students and staff of the NCA, with the Punjab Archives and the Conservation Lab of the Lahore Museum later guiding and assisting in the conservation and development of the archival collections. Visits were also undertaken to the National Archives of Pakistan in Islamabad. The NC Archives collections include administrative records of the institution, government circulars, meeting minutes, student and staff records, building documentation, a very significant collection of documents related to curricula and syllabi development, rare books, journals and portfolios, and correspondence, drawings, and photographs related to colonial and post-colonial commissions and art and design exhibitions. The NC Archives, like other similar archives in Lahore, face a double set of challenges stemming from both our local context as well as our post-colonial reality. We are therefore both a post-colonial archive and what can be termed a tropical archive. Issues stemming from a very local and geopolitical context include import restrictions, a lack of standardization or organizational sustainability and staff continuity, as well as a lack of specialized training programs within Pakistan, as well as limited external support facilities, virtually non-existent research infrastructures, and no sustainable regional collaboration with neighboring countries. Being a post-colonial archive means that we deal with fragmented, displaced, and dispersed collections and populations, incomplete or unclear legislative protection, epistemic issues, low priority in policy and resource allocation, but at the same time our collections are essential for studying the on-the-ground impacts of colonial policies and their persistence into present day. Being a tropical archive means we have to deal with an increased challenge of insect and pest infestations, flooding, humidity, and extremely hot temperatures worsened by climate change. All of this requires additional time and resources which archives in post-colonial countries often do not have. Below you can see a newspaper clipping mentioning the Conservation Lab of the Lahore Museum, which as of December 2022 had been inactive for 17 years owing to a shortage of staff and required equipment. The same Conservation Lab had played a role in the initial setting up of the NC archives. Our print collections trace the NCA's history through all of its phases. On the left is a print created at the Litho department at the Mayo School in 1915. At the center is a post-partition diploma printed after 1955 but before the restructuring of 1958, and on the right is a print advertising the then newly established NCA. These are the types of items researchers usually expect at the NCA archives. As an institution that had been founded primarily to create and improve upon the designs of art and craft objects, many archival records dating from the MSA period document and trace the histories of these very objects. Here is a photo of the Punjab Court at the Calcutta International Exhibition dated 1883 to 84, showing a collection of craft items manufactured in the Punjab, including at the MSA. Also exhibited at this exhibition were busts sculpted by J.L. Kipling, two of which are currently with NCA and placed at the Vice Chancellor's office. In the Principal's Report of the Mayo School for the year 1883 to 84, that is the year of the Calcutta exhibition, Kipling mentions that while in Calcutta for the exhibition, he along with Gervais Pinto, modeler for the school, had made busts from life in front of the students. It is unclear whether these were the same busts that had been exhibited at the exhibition and that are now at the Vice Chancellor's office. What is clear from this excerpt, however, is the role sculpting from life and its live demonstration to students played in Kipling's understanding of art and art education. Tracing object habits while writing object histories, that is, the ways that cultural objects have been collected, received, presented, interpreted, and in our case also created and exhibited, can help in the development of textured histories that record the entanglement of these objects with politics and ideologies. In many cases, this facilitates the integration of these histories into contemporary debates. We also have many items donated by staff and alumni, and here we have 2 photographs of NCA's founding principals born and work at the Lahore railway station in May 1962. These images have been donated to the archive by one of our late faculty members, Jamila Zaidi. Much can also be said about the materiality of these photographs as objects in themselves, containing both the image on the front and the information written by hand on the back. Other records include NCA development scheme proposals, faculty group photos, and different emblems and markers of the MSA and NCA's history. While documenting our own history, our records also shed light on the relationship the MSA had with other institutions, in this case the Lahore Museum. On the right is a poster, quote, drawn, lithographed and printed at the litho department, end quote, at the MSA, advertising the Mayor School's exhibition of craftworks held in the Central Museum, Lahore in April 1917. The same exhibition has been mentioned by Lionel Heath in the report on the working of the Central Museum, Lahore for the year 1917 to 18. I received access to this report through the Internet Archive, and he writes on page 7 that, quote, all the galleries were open to the public except the new gallery, which remains unfitted with showcases and is used only by the principal Mayor School of Art for an annual exhibition of craftwork. The one held this year was designed to show the members of the Industrial Commission the work being done by the Industrial School of the province. End quote. At the center is a photograph from the MSA albums at the NC Archives showing a cabinet-marked, quote, register of Punjabis who served in the Great War, end quote. Meanwhile, on the left is S.N. Gupta's incisive criticism of the then museum curator Dr. Sitaram's note on the future development of the museum from 1930. Here he also refers to the quote, case containing record of recruits during the Great War, end quote, which may be removed to the library. I believe this may be the same case as the one in the above photograph, which may or may not have survived to the present day. I will now be taking you over the case study of a brass lamp commissioned by Lord Curzon for the Gateway to the Taj. The story starts with a reproduction of a photograph that has been in circulation on Facebook, and a copy of which had been framed and hung within the NC Archive office space as well. Nowhere was the actual source of this photograph mentioned. However, we were able to trace this photograph to the Royal Commonwealth Society collections at the Cambridge University Library. You can see here both the album page containing this specific photo as well as a screenshot of the metadata record from the CUL's repository page. Looking at the metadata record of the image itself, we were able to identify both its date and the fact that the lamp at the back was then being exhibited at the Franco-British exhibition. This led us to 3 files at the NC Archives, namely 13A Bronze Lamps Agra, 24A Franco-British Exhibition London, and 27A Account of Franco-British Exhibition. And by doing this, we are not only able to identify the exact moment of the lamp's inception and the evolution of its design, but also the trajectory of the lamp's travels from Lahore to London and back, and then finally from Lahore to Agra, as well as the exact moment the quote, box containing a large lamp for the Taj at Agra, end quote, was received by the archaeological surveyor in the city. We were also able to identify the moment the lamp was requested to be sent to the Franco-British exhibition. This letter to Percy Brown from the Secretary Indian section reads, the committee would very much like to receive on loan the large brass lamp your students are making for the entrance to the Taj Mahal at Agra, and they hope that the archaeological department would be so good as to permit it being sent on loan. The committee would see that it was shown in as prominent a position as possible at the entrance to the Indian Pavilion, and it shall be carefully packed and returned at the close of the exhibition. Meanwhile, we also have well-maintained records of everything that was sent and received back from the Franco-British exhibition. We also know that photographs, quote, illustrative of the work of the Education Department, end quote, were requested the month before the photographs from the Royal Commonwealth Society collections at the CUL are dated from. Also note that the CUL holds 2 other photographs in the series, all documenting classroom settings at the MSA. There could possibly be a link between this request and the photos in the RCS collections. We also know from this letter that Bhairam Singh had sent photographs to J.C. Godley, Director of Public Instruction Punjab, before 16 March 1908. Godley writes, I don't think much can be done at such short notice. There are photographs of students at work among those that Bhairam Singh sent me later, if those are likely to be of any interest. Unfortunately, however, till at least 2018, when this article was published in the Times of India, the actual stewards of the Taj Mahal had not had any access to this information contained within the NC archives. The MSA lamp for the Taj had fallen and been damaged in 2015. This 2018 article, marking the reinstallation of the repaired lamp, attempts to trace its history but appears to conflate the gateway lamp created at the Mayor School of Arts with one that had been produced elsewhere. This is of course a direct consequence of the fragmentation of post-colonial archives, but something that may be on the mend at the digital turn. Another issue that becomes apparent through this photograph is the prevalence of children within the workshops at the Mayo School of Arts. This leads us to ask who these children were and how the experience of childhood differed between the colonies and the metropole. We know from photocopies obtained from the Punjab archives that children had been present at the MSA since at least 1878. Here, the then officiating principal remarks that he himself had been doubtful whether these children were, quote, not too young to profit greatly by instruction, end quote. Interestingly, 5 of these, quote, smaller boys, end quote, are also referred to by name within this letter. However, all of this leads us to wonder that if these children had initially been considered too young, even by 19th century standards, then how young would they actually appear through a 21st century lens? On the left is a letter asking for, quote, design and estimates for 2 good lamps of Oriental design required for Salim Chishti's tomb and mosque at Fatehpur Sikri, end quote. On the right is a photograph taken by me in 2014 at the Fatehpur Sikri mosque of a lamp similar to the ones designed and produced at the MSA. This photo was taken during an NCA student's trip to India, and at the time all of us were unaware of any possible connection these lamps might have to the NCA. Here is a similar photo taken at Akbar's tomb during the same trip. On the left is the letter that I showed you earlier, where it is mentioned that lamps are also required for Akbar's tomb in addition to the Taj. Here you can see photographs of more such lamps likely produced at the Mayo School of Arts. These photos are part of the MSA albums at the NCA archives. In addition to object histories, our collections can also shed light on other facets of our colonial past. Here is a letter from file 71C at the NCA archives, which contains correspondence regarding a stipend that had been announced for MSA students who belong to what were considered artisan castes. The letter shows a desperate request to be considered for the stipend as the author is poor and his, quote, uncles are carpenters, end quote, meaning he is related to artisans and therefore part of an artisan caste. He is, however, declared a non-artisan. Both of these applicants, meanwhile, are declared artisans, with the one on the right being referred to as a born artisan. Documents such as these can help shed light on the role of the British Raj and its native administrators in the consolidation of casteism within the modern society of British India. While the NCA archive may not be a partition archive, it still records traces of the trauma of both the 1947 and the 71 partitions. This letter from 1947, retrieved from the personal file of R. Trivedi, once the head modelling teacher at the MSA, reads, most humbly and respectfully, I beg to say that on 23rd of August 47, I have sent you a telegram in format Delhi. On the day of 16th August, I have left Lahore and reached on 23rd August at Delhi. However, I was unable to attend my duties on 14th August 1947 due to disturbed condition of Lahore. As yet, I am much grieved, emotionally hurt in seeing helpless people running for shelter and protection for life. Almighty God was in angry mood and mankind were in lap of mercy. Please let me know when I should resume my duties. I hope your worthy self will be kind enough to transfer my service in East Punjab immediately, hoping to be excused for the trouble. Also included within our collections is propaganda and related items created at the MSA during the First World War, as well as propaganda generated during the Second World War, where the Empire made concerted efforts to reach local communities in their native languages. From pamphlets to flyers, the British Empire could be seen repeatedly asking the locals to invest in the war effort either through defense saving certificates or defense loans, etc. Here we see a pamphlet regarding the Lahore Warplane Fund asking locals to donate towards the cost of the aerial defense of the city. Written in Gurmukhi, we at first could not read the text or identify the script of this pamphlet. Translation to English using Google Lens resulted in a repetitive translation that sounded a bit absurd. However, soon realizing that while the script may be unreadable, the language itself, considering it probably belonged to the Punjab, would be understandable by us at the archive. We therefore copied the original Gurmukhi and asked Google Translate to read it out loud. This was the result which all of us could understand, and one of us remarked that it reminded them of how their grandmother used to speak.
ਸਿਫਰ 8 31 ਮੌਜੂਦਾ ਜਨ ਅਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਮਾਪਿਓ ਭੈਣ ਭਰਾ ਤੀਵੀਂ ਬੱਚੇ ਅਤੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਘਰ ਪਿਆਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੌਣ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਕਿਸ ਦੀ ਇੱਛਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜੀਵਨ ਸੁਖ ਤੇ ਸ਼ਾਂਤੀ ਨਾਲ ਨਾ ਗੁਜ਼ਰੇ
Records dating from the British period show better standardization, as the MSA had then been part of greater bureaucratic machinery, with greater collaboration across colonial government institutions and bodies. As the empire was fragmented, so too were its archives. So we now find related records and objects scattered across the world from, for example, Lahore, Agra, London, and Cambridge, etc. Our collections also show that there has always been a focus on art and identity at the MSA and NCA. First in the development of the British Punjabi identity through craft, then to the West Pakistani identity, and then to Pakistan's national identity through art and design. Within our present context, I see this need for demarcating the roles and responsibilities of the archivist and those of the researcher. So the archivist, especially one who is being funded by public money, is obligated to collect, enrich, digitize, preserve the holdings they're in charge of, which is their everyday work, but with the end goal of disseminating this information in the public interest and also in the interest of historical research. And for this, we can also look towards international principles and best practices, including the International Council on Archives Code of Ethics, the Trust Principles for Digital Repositories, the Fair Data Principles that recommend that data and its metadata should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable for both humans and their computational agents, the CARE Principles for Indigenous Data Governance, and the Cultural Heritage Data Reuse Charter. At the data level, while the FAIR Principles help facilitate research and scientific data reuse and sharing, the CARE Principles for Indigenous Data Governance shift focus from data-centric criteria for the benefit of research to encouraging data practices that protect and enhance the well-being of people. The CARE Principles have been designed to complement the FAIR Principles to promote the appropriate and ethical reuse of indigenous data. Developers of the CARE Principles welcome broadening interest in the application of these principles to data about communities beyond indigenous peoples, but note that the development phase of the CARE Principles will focus on indigenous data to enable the, quote, full contribution of indigenous values and perspectives in the innovation of data governance policies and practices. Additionally, the Trust Principles and the Cultural Heritage Data Reuse Charter respectively provide guidelines for creating and nourishing mutually beneficial relationships between repositories and data users, and for reconciling data management practices and the FAIR Principles with the domain-specific concerns of cultural heritage data. This table gives an overview of the FAIR Principles in full. The FAIR Principles were created to increase the reuse of scientific data so that researchers do not have to reinvent the wheel at the start of each new project. While initially created for the natural sciences, they have now also been adopted by the cultural heritage domain and have becoming a prerequisite for European Commission funding. However, the same prerequisite is not required for European Commission funded projects outside the EU, especially in the so-called Global South, raising concerns about possible double standards at play, leading to the unequal and inequitable development of research infrastructures around the world. While the CARE Principles may provide a good framework for incorporating concerns about ethical and responsible practices and the rights of indigenous communities within data management, they were created to complement the FAIR Principles within a specific systemic and infrastructural context. In my recent discussions with cultural heritage experts from across Africa and West and South Asia, there was a general feeling that the CARE Principles might be impossible to implement within our post-colonial context. One of the points raised was that the CARE Principles were created in North America, where there was a clear demarcation between indigenous communities and the settler colonial society, while the same would not be true for Asia and Africa, leaving room for the exploitation of these principles. Similarly, in places such as Palestine and Lebanon, where indigenous communities are in active military conflict with settler colonizers, the CARE Principles may be too idealistic to be implementable. Additionally, these principles are still only recommendations which may remain toothless unless adopted into legislation. There is therefore need for greater conversation on the implementation of these standards and principles both at a national level and at the level of the so-called Global South. When excavating the archive, we need to understand that everything that has been saved was done so for a purpose by those in power. We therefore need to also trace the histories of what and who has been written out of the archive, or that which has only unintentionally been incorporated into archival record. We also need to be mindful of the entanglements of the so-called civilizing forces of art, craft, and education with the project of colonialism. Operation Legacy, for example, was a calculated effort by the British Empire to sanitize the archive, necessitated by their departure from the African continent and their embarrassment at the overt burning of documents during their exit from India. This was an operation running from the 1950s to the 70s that either destroyed or removed to England any documents they felt might implicate in wrongdoing or embarrass either the empire or its agents. I was reminded of Operation Legacy in 2021 as I saw black smoke rising above Kabul's green zone as the US exited the city with the Taliban fast approaching. We can only expect an acceleration in the willful destruction of archival data in the future, but with the advent of digital archives, this destruction may not be as visible as it was in the past. When managing the archive, of course, we need to constantly ask how our collections can be better preserved, researched, and made accessible. However, knowing that the rise of the digital humanities has made more data available for analysis, we also need to ask how we can incorporate digital tools and methods into our processes while being mindful of the inherent inequities of the digital. This may include connecting information using semantic data modeling or linked open data, making it accessible and discoverable using metadata schemas and the CDOC CRM, which is the ISO standard for the controlled exchange of cultural heritage information, or making text searchable through text encoding, etc. International standards and best practices such as FAIR and CARE can help guide this process, leading us towards adopting the ethos of the phrase that open science is just good science. As the more open we make our archives and collections research, the more visible and verifiable they get, but also more opportunities are created for reconnecting fragmented archival collections and filling in gaps and correcting inaccuracies within our databases and historical research. For more information, feedback, or to gain access to our collections, please write to us at archive@nca.edu.pk.
Today I will discuss about the prerequisites and protocols for accessing archival data. Archival data serve as a cornerstone in historical research, offering a rich tapestry for primary sources that provide scholars with invaluable insights into the past. These repositories for historical records, manuscripts, and photographs represent the cumulative memory of societies, institutions, and individuals. The importance of archival data in historical research cannot be overstated, as it not only preserves the cultural heritage but also lays the foundation for a comprehensive understanding of the complexities that have shaped our world. Archival data stands as a custodian of cultural heritage, safeguarding documents and materials that encapsulate the echoes of bygone eras. Within the hollowed halls of archives lie the handwritten letters of historical figures, rare photographs capturing significant moments, and the official records that chronicles the ebbs and flow of societies. These materials are not just relics, they are windows into the lives, thoughts, and actions of those who came before us. By preserving cultural heritage, archival data allows us to connect with our roots and appreciates the diversity and richness of human experiences across time. One of the unique aspects of archival data is its capacity to unveil unwritten histories and voices that may have been marginalized or overlooked in mainstream narratives. Within these repositories, researchers often discover stories of resilience, resistance, and innovation that challenge preconceived notions of the past. Whether it's the narratives of individuals on the society or documents shedding light on suppressed movements. Archival data served as a crucial tool for reconstructing a more inclusive understanding of history. Archival data, being comprised of primary sources, offers a level of authenticity and immediacy that is unparalleled in historical research. Letters, diaries, official documents, and other first hand accounts provide a direct window into the thoughts and experiences of historical actors. This authenticity allows researchers to construct narratives based on the raw, unfiltered perspective of individuals, offering a more genuine representation of the past compared to secondary or interpretative sources. The interdisciplinary nature of archival data encourages collaboration across academic disciplines. Historians, sociologists, anthropologists, linguists, and more can find a wealth of information within archival collection. For instance, linguistic scholars may explore historical letters for changes in language pattern, while sociologists may analyze demographic data from census records. This collaborative approach fosters a more comprehensive and holistic understanding of historical events and phenomena. Archival data plays a crucial role in informing contemporary policy and decision making. Governments, institutions, and organizations often turn to historical records to understand the historical context of current issues, assess the effectiveness of past policies, and make informed decisions for the future. The lessons gathered from archival research can guide policymakers in developing strategies that are informed by an understanding of historical patterns and trajectories. In the digital age, archival institutions are undergoing a transformative shift, making historical records more accessible and even before. Digitization efforts allow researchers worldwide to access archival materials remotely, breaking down geographical barriers and democratizing access to historical resources. Online platforms and databases further facilitates the research, discovery, and sharing of archival data, empowering a broader community of researchers, educators, and the general public to engage with history. While archival data offers immense opportunities, it also presents challenges and ethical consideration. Preservation, digitization, and metadata standardization efforts require significant resources. Moreover, issues related to privacy, culture sensitivity, and the potential for bias in archival collections necessitate careful ethical consideration. Archivists and researchers alike must navigate these challenges responsibly to ensure the accessibility of archival data align with the ethical standards and respects the rights and dignity of individuals and communities presented in the records. A robust framework for accessing archival data is paramount to ensure that historical records are not only preserved but also made accessible to researchers and users. Proper documentation serves as the foundation of this framework, capturing essential details about each archival item. From the creator of the record and its historical context to its physical condition and provenance, thorough documentation establishes a comprehensive record that aids in effective retrieval and understanding. Equally crucial is the establishment and adherence to metadata standards. Metadata or data about data provides the necessary information to identify, describe, and manage archival materials. Standardized metadata ensures consistency across collections and making it easier for researchers to navigate diverse set of archival data. By adopting recognized metadata standards, archival institutions contribute to the creation of a shared language that transcends individuals' collection, enabling seamless integration into broader research endeavors. Clear procedures for researchers or users seeking access are integral component of a robust framework. These procedures outline the steps one must follow to gain access to archival materials, emphasizing transparency, fairness, and adherence to ethical and legal considerations. Access protocol may include application processes, usage policies, and guidelines for handling fragile materials. Striking a balance between accessibility and the protection of sensitive information is key, ensuring that valuable resources are available while respecting privacy and ethical standards. Despite the importance of archival access, navigating the complexities of archival collections present inherent challenges. One primary challenge is the sheer volume and diversity of materials housed within archival repositories. Archival collections can span a myriad of formats, including documents, photographs, maps, audio recordings, and more. Specialized knowledge and training are prerequisites for effectively identifying, handling, and interpreting these varied materials. Archival collections often lack uniformity in terms of organization and cataloging, further complicating the navigating process. Researchers may encounter collections arranged by creator, theme, or provenance, each requiring a distinct approach. Specialized training equips researchers with the skills needed to decipher the archival findings, aid understand collection hierarchies, and effectively locate relevant materials within the vast expanse of archival holdings. Preservation challenges also impact access. Fragile and deteriorating materials demand careful handling, and restrictions may be imposed to prevent further degradation. Researchers must be familiar of preservation consideration, respecting the guidelines provided by archival institutions to ensure the durability of the materials they consult. This underscores the importance of not only specialized knowledge but also a shared responsibility for the preservation of our historical heritage. Navigating archival collections successfully required specialized knowledge and training. Archival materials often have unique characteristics and preservation needs that differ from standard library collections. Archivists, as stewards of these materials, undergo specialized training to understand the intricacies of archival management, preservation, and access. Researchers too benefit from specialized training to maximize the utility of archival resources. Training programs may cover archival research methodologies, paleography, conservation practices, and ethical considerations. Familiarities with the archival terminology, standards, and finding aids enhances researchers' ability to navigate collections effectively and extract meaningful insights from historical records. Furthermore, the digital age has introduced new dimensions to archival access, requiring researchers to be adept at navigating online databases, understanding digitization processes, and critically evaluating digital backups. Archival literacy, encompassing both traditional and digital skills, is thus essential for researchers to engage effectively with archival materials in contemporary research environment. In the dynamic landscape of archival access, the digital age has guided in transformative changes, redefining how researchers, scholars, and the general public interact with historical record. A pivotal aspect of this evolution is the concerted digitization efforts undertaken by archival institutions worldwide. Digitization involves converting analog materials such as manuscripts, photographs, and audio recordings into digital formats, thereby expanding access beyond the confines of physical repositories. Digitization efforts address the dual challenge of preserving fragile material while democratizing access. Fragile documents, often sensitive to deterioration through handling and exposure, can be safeguarded through digitization. Once digitized, these materials become accessible to a global audience, modifying geographical constraints and allowing researchers to explore historical narratives without the needs for physical